Hello friends, in this video we are going to discuss about Plato. We are going to deal with Plato's biographical sketch, Platonic corpus, features of Plato's philosophy. Let's have a look into Plato's biographical sketch. It deals with introduction, personal and family sketch, Plato's education and academy, influence of Socrates and others, and the influence of Athenian politics. Plato 428 to 347 BCE. In the entire history of political thought, no thinker evoked the admiration, reverence, and criticism that Plato did. It has been said that all the subsequent philosophers merely a footnote to Plato, and this is certainly true of political philosophy. Plato's Republic sketches out the fundamentals for political theory. The origins of society, it suggests, are in practical self-interest. But although the pursuit of wealth motivates all, it must not motivate the rulers, the guardians. Plato sees two main threats to society, either external, requiring a military response, or internal, requiring a political response. Internal threats are minimized by ensuring the ruling class are there solely on merit and receive no rewards other than satisfaction from performing their duty and achieving a well-ordered society. All the metaphysical concerns raising by Plato subsequently arriving at a phonetic juncture, the good life. Now about the personal sketch of Plato. Plato was born in 428 BC in Greece and a distinguished Athenian aristocratic family. His real name was Aristocles, which meant the best and renowned. He was given the nickname Plato, derived from Platus because of his broad shoulders. Plato met Socrates in 407 BC at the age of 20 and since then was under his hypnotic spell. He excelled in the study of music, mathematics, poetry, and rhetoric. He fought in 3 wars and won an award of bravery. He made visits to Italy and Egypt, which were molded his philosophic and artistic outfits. He started his academy in 386 BC to teach philosophy, mathematics, music, law, etc. And at last, Plato died in 347 BC. He never married. Family background of Plato. Plato was a member of a noble and well-known Athenian family. His father, Ariston, traced his ancestry to the early kings of Athens, even to Poseidon. His mother, Periston, was a descendant of Solon, the famous lawgiver of early Athens. Periston's brother, Commodus, and uncle, Critias, were among the 30 Turans. Plato had one sister, Poton, 2 brothers, Adimandus and Glaucon. Plato also had one half-brother, Antiphon. After Ariston's death, Periston married Pyrilymbus, who already had a son called Demos. Pyrilymbus had strong democratic sympathies when Plato was against the democratic spirit. Now about Plato's education. Plato got a better formal education and excelled as a brilliant student. He excelled in areas like metaphysics, mathematics, ethics, politics, art, literature, etc. Then Plato met Socrates in 407 BC at the age of 20, then became the prolific disciple of Socrates. In 404 BC, he fled to Megara, where he took refuge with Euclid, the renowned geometrician. From Megara, he went to Egypt to study mathematics and historical traditions of the priest. In 387, he visited the Pythagorean philosopher, mathematician, and political leader Archytas. Plato's early education had a nomadic character. Therefore, Plato's early education had a nomadic character. The method of education he got was a key determining factor behind his philosophical outlooks and styles and the theme of corpus. Then about Plato's academy. Plato started his academy in 386 BC, which was initially a religious group dedicated to the worship of Muses and his leader Apollo. The subjects in this academy are mathematics, which included arithmetic and advanced geometry, astronomy, music, law, and philosophy. The importance of mathematics was clear from the inscription at the portals of the academy. Medius Geometritis Esito, or let no one with geometry enter here. The academy concretized the possibility of a science of knowledge with which one could reform the world. Plato saw in the academy a training school for future philosophic rulers. The Republic served as his prospect of his academy. Teaching in the academy was imparted through lectures, dialectics, and problem-solving situations. For Plato, the search for truth was not through mere instruction and theoretical knowledge, but with the guidance of an advanced mind. Socrates has great influence on Plato, influence of Socrates and others. Socrates, from whom Plato accepted the teleological rather than a mechanical explanation of the world and of perceiving political phenomena within an ethical framework. Politically, they did not draw a distinction between the state and society, and within society as different spheres. Philosophy meant not only the study of man and society, but also the study of the universe and nature. Accepting the Socratic dicta, virtue is knowledge and a life unexamined is not worth living, Plato argued that wrong deeds had their origin in ignorance, whereas knowledge led to right actions and happiness. Like Socrates, knowledge for Plato represented a vision, transcending us from the world of appearance to the world of reality. This process was described as a conversion of the soul, to ensure that the power that existed in a soul was turned in the right direction. Attainment of knowledge did not mean leading a life of contemplation, for it had to be combined with the service to the community. Thus, for Plato, there was a societal dimension to individual excellence. Socrates is a major character in all the Platonic dialogues which were dialectically elaborated. Then the influence of others on Plato. The another important one is Pythagoras. Pythagoras, from whom Plato borrowed many ideas like the importance of mathematics, belief in otherworldliness, and in the immortality of the human soul, sexual equality, and the idea of the philosopher ruler. Pythagoras believed that a renunciation of earthly goods and purification from sensuality held the key to salvation. He also believed in the teaching of Orifix. Orifix means the transmigration of souls. Another one is Heraclitus. From Heraclitus, Plato realized that nothing was permanent in the sensory world. Things constantly changed, modifying themselves into new shapes and forms, captured graphically in the statement, "From everything one is made, and from one everything." Essential harmony hidden in nature eventually manifested itself through harmony in the opposite. Parmenides, who dismissed sense objects as illusions and regarded the one as the only real thing which was infinite and indivisible. He did not think of the one as a unity of opposites, since there were no opposites. It was not God. He thought of it as a material and extended and spoke of it as a sphere. Then the influence of Athenian politics on Plato. Plato was lived between 427 to 347 BCE. These were troubled times for Athens, which was suffering mounting losses in the Second Peloponnesian War. In 404 to 403 BCE, the democratic government of Athens was overthrown by oligarchic factions which ruled for short periods. In 404 to 403 BCE, Athens experienced a second year of civil strife, and the so-called tyranny of the 30, backed by Sparta, established itself into power. Plato was invited to join the oligarchy since some of the 30 tyrants were his relatives. Plato refused to have anything to do with this government. When the Democrats came back a year later, they began a wave of revenge punishments. These included judicial proceedings against Socrates and his subsequent execution in 399. In shock and disgust at the death of his teacher, whom Plato revered as the wisest man in Athens, Plato left Athens and began his travels in Greece, Egypt, and Italy. He was invited in 367 BCE to the city-state of Syracuse in Italy to act as a political advisor. At the forefront of the Athenian politics was the ecclesia, which it was a right and duty of every male Athenian citizen who was over 20 years old to attend. Citizenship was restricted to free-born Athenian males, and out of a population of about 3 lakh in Athens, not more than 50,000 would have been citizens. The quorum of the ecclesia was set at 6,000, and it met about 40 times in a year, which means that there was a section of the ecclesia after about every 9 days. The second important political institution in Athens was the bowl or the council, which was permanently in session throughout the year, and which was responsible both for preparing the agenda of each section of the assembly as well as for implementing the decisions taken at the sessions. The bowl was held in its executive functions by magistrates, and there were as many as 600 of them in Athens, each appointed for an annual term. The courts were known as the dikastria, and the juries were served in them was known as the dikastes. The courts ranged in size from 201 to 501 juries to even larger sizes depending on the cases. Now about Platonic corpus. Platonic corpus or dialogues can be divided into four transitional periods, that is the Socratic dialogues, transitional period, period of maturity, independent corpus. During the Socratic dialogue period, Plato wrote Apology, Crito, Enthipro, Laches, Lysis, Charmides, Protagoras and Republic I. During the transitional period, Plato wrote Meno, Gorgias, Enthydemus, Cratylus, Lesser Hippias, Greater Hippias and Menexenus. In the period of maturity, Plato wrote Phaedo, Symposium, Phaedrus, Timaeus, Philebus, Republic 2 to 10. And in the independent corpus, Plato wrote the Tasteman and the Laws. Then what are the characteristics of Platonic corpus? Plato's philosophical interests range from metaphysics to poetry. Platonic corpus is a perfect example for dialectical reasoning and inductive logic. Socrates is a dominant speaker in Platonic dialogues. Platonic dialogues are the real-time reflections on the Greek city-states. Plato gives significant importance to the analysis of individual morality in his dialogues. Plato's contribution to political philosophy reflecting mainly in his three works, the Republic, the Statesman and the Laws. Platonic corpus is idealistic in nature, which emphasized on forms like goodness, beauty, equality, bigness, likeness, unity, being, sameness, difference, change and changelessness. Platonic conditions are a little bit hypothetical and contradictory. Let us examine the Platonic corpus in detail. The first stage is the Socratic dialogues. The first one is Apology. Apology is an account of the speech Socrates makes at the trial in which he is charged with not recognizing the gods recognized by the state, inventing new deities and corrupting the young youth of Athens. It was an imaginative and satirical version of Socrates' defense trial. The basic premise of Apology was that Socrates had a divine mission to philosophize and elevate his soul and encourage others to do the same. The next one is Crito. Crito depicts a conversation between Socrates and his rich friend Crito in a prison cell in Athens. Crito explained the question and extent of social and political obligation and disobedience. Charmides explained the idea of self-knowledge or the Socratic dictum of not-the-self and considered temperance or self-control as a key to maintaining one's equilibrium. Enthipro has a clear understanding of what is pious or holy and impious or unholy. Enthipro stated that service to the divine holiness is a noble activity which would elevate the soul. Then the Laches are these dialogues which attempts to define the virtue of courage but succeeds in doing so much more. As with most of the dialogues, it ends in the discovery that such nebulous concepts are nearly impossible to neatly describe to everyone's satisfaction. Then the Lysis. Lysis is a dialogue of Plato discusses the nature of friendship, while the word's original content was of much larger and more intimate bond. Then the Protagoras. Protagoras contain the views of the sophist Protagoras, contrasting them with those of Socrates. Now let's look into the transitional period of Plato. The first one is Meno. Meno deals with the idea of teaching virtue as stated in Protagoras. It contains an unsuccessful search for a definition of virtue. Socrates proved that some of our knowledge is innate, a discussion of whether virtue can be taught, and a discussion of why there are no teachers of virtue. The second one is Gorgias. Gorgias seeks and unveils the true definition and essence of rhetoric. It passionately pleaded for the need to adhere to one's conscience. Then third one is Euthydemus. It satirizes what Plato presents as the logical fallacies of the sophist. In it, Socrates describes to his friend Crito a visit he and various youth paid to two brothers, Euthydemus and Dinosodorus. Then Cratylus. The subject of Cratylus is a correctness of names. In other words, it is a critic on the subject of naming. Then Lesser Hippias. Lesser Hippias explain the philosophical contradictions between the sophist thinker Protagoras and Socrates. It primarily deals with voluntary and non-voluntary wrongdoing. Then the Greater Hippias. Greater Hippias explain that good had nothing to do with values that were pleasant and useful, an idea propagated by the sophist. It debates on what to do in order to see who is wise and who is not. Then Iron. It raises the question of whether the rhapsody, a performer of poetry, gives his performance an account of his skill and knowledge or by virtue of divine possession. Then Menexenus. Menexenus was a critic of the Periclean Golden Age. He dismissed the idea that art was a matter of expediency. It is regarded as a Platonic commentary over Pericles' funeral oration. Now we are going to discuss about the period of maturity. During this period of maturity, the Plato written the famous Republic. A republic concerning justice, clarifying questions and establishing truth. It was one of the finest examples of the dialectical method. He placed dialectics in the service of ethics, defining virtue as basis for rational and moral transformation. The discussions in the Republic were conducted in a single room among Socrates, Cephalus, and his son Polemarchus, Thrasymachus, Glaucon, and Adimantus. Socrates was a main spokesman in the Republic. It began with the quest of understanding the idea of good and explained how a perfect soul could be developed. Republic explored the notion of justice and its realization within the individual and the state. It sketched a detailed picture of the polity and social institutions with a view to attaining human excellence and perfection. The second one in the period of maturity is Phaedo. Phaedo is the last dialogue by Socrates in which Plato elaborating his own metaphysical, psychological and epistemological views. It contains discussions on the doctrine of knowledge as recollection and his views about causality and scientific explanation. Phaedo also presented a rational case for the immortality of the soul. Third one is Symposium. Symposium explains the concept of love or eros, the possibility of transcending a desire for material objects and developing a passion for beauty in a supersenses form. It also explored the nature of forms as objects of mystic contemplation by the immortal soul. Then Timaeus. Timaeus examined the origin of life in the imaginary continent Atlantis. Then Philebus. Philebus focused on ethics and good life. Now let's examine the independent corpus of Plato. The first one is Tasteman. The Statesman is a dialectical investigation into the nature of a statesman. In the Statesman, Plato admits that although there is a correct science of government, like geometry, it cannot be realized. And he stresses the need for the rule of law since no ruler can be trusted with unbridled power. He then examines which of the current forms of government is the least difficult to live with. For the ruler, after all, is an artist who has to work within the limits of his medium. The statement was intended to clarify that to rule or have political power called for a specialized knowledge. The statement was one who possessed this special knowledge of how to rule justly and well and to have the best interest of the citizens at heart. It is presented that politics should be run by this knowledge or gnosis. Socrates, Theodorus, an Eleatic stranger, and the younger Socrates are the major characteristics in the statesman. Final one is the laws. The laws is Plato's last and longest dialogue. Laws begins with the question of who is given the credit for establishing a civilization's laws. Laws involves extensive discussions on psychology, ethics, theology, epistemology, and metaphysics. Laws combine political philosophy with applied legislation, going into great detail concerning what laws and procedures should be in Magnesia. Primacy of law systems. Key areas debating in the laws are divine revelation, divine law and law-giving, the role of intelligence in law-giving, the relations of philosophy, religion and politics, the role of music, exercise and dance in education, natural law and natural right, etc. An unnamed Athenian, a Spartan named Megillus, and a Cretan named Clinias were the key characters in the laws. The final section of this lecture deals with Platonic thought, Platonic styles and themes, political and moral principles, anti-democratic spirit, moral philosophy and centrality of virtue, political philosophy and centrality of justice. Let's discuss about the Platonic styles and themes in detail. He was a critic of sophism and exploration of Socratic philosophy. Then the dialectical method of inquiry, that is the discussions between two or more interlocutors. Platonic idealism, essence is attributing an existence in itself, independence of minds and things. Then the coordination between political and moral philosophy. Allegorical interpretations, that is the interpretation of myths and logos. Then philosophical absolutism, philosopher king as a supreme guardian of the state and society. Theory of three classes and three souls as a core of political philosophy. The idea of good as a supreme principle which surpasses in dignity and power. Momentum toward love of beauty as a powerful instrument of access to truth. Institutionalization of education, that is why he set up an academy. Plato is ignorant towards practical realities, therefore Platonic philosophy was a bit prejudicial and parochial. Then about Plato's major themes. Plato on the nature of things, where he states the natural world, despite disruptions, displays a striking degree of order and regularity. And his inquiry into justice, meaning by that moral virtue and individual needs in order to behave properly towards others. Exploration of race into the treatment of politia explains how individuals in the just society expected to be considered. Then about the theory of education. Theory of education which intended to eradicate injustice and political ills by the creation of knowledgeable citizens. Then the theory of forms which inculcating the ideas of the good, justice, beauty, truth, courage and other moral attributes in the minds of individuals. On the ideal state and the philosopher king, the community of wives and properties tried to eliminate all the negativities that obstructed the proper growth of the individuals. Then about the political and moral principles of Plato. Plato in his Apology says that one's individual reason is the final authority over oneself. Virtue is linked with both private and public good, as well as the knowledge of virtue can only be achieved through a rational discussion conducted with others. In Crito, Plato says that an individual's reason develops by participating in the life of the city, that is a political community, and yet that an individual's reason, ability to know virtue, can be used to judge the practices of the community. In the Republic, Plato says that a just individual will be a virtuous individual as well as part of a just political community. Good life in the city will be based on the twin principles of interdependence and specialization. The same force and qualities are to be found in each one of us that are in the state because the state is made up, after all, of individuals. Every individual must keep his appetites and spirits under the control of his reason. Then also in the Republic, Plato says that justice serves a common interest. It is central for political life. Responsibilities and rewards will be distributed in a just society. A just individual is one who does his job and does not interfere in another's work. One who does not take more than his share and does not take another's share. To do one's own business and not to be a busybody is justice. Justice is this principle of everyone doing his own task. Both knowledge and power are complementary. In the Tasteman, Plato opines that a rule of law is superior, opposed to personal dictatorship. Where a sovereign law existed, limited monarchy was better than democracy. But in the absence of a sovereign, democracy was better than an irresponsible autocratic rule of one of few. A statesman is one who is entitled to rule without laws and the consent of his subjects. In the laws, Plato opined that mixed constitution as the best, for it moderated between the two extremes, that is, a despotism and freedom. Let's discuss about the anti-democratic spirit of Plato. Plato was keen on revitalizing and reforming the aristocracy so that it could once again become the basis of civic life. Aristocracy is seen as the best way to counter the sweep of the democratic revolution led by the traders, artisans and merchants, and the crass materialism and individualism that was slowly engulfing Athenian society. Plato equated democratization with moral corruption and degradation and endeavored to reform and revolutionize the general quality of human life. He dismissed the Athenian practice of happy versatility, whereby every Greek male adult could participate in the political process and offer a political opinion, as amateurism. He attacked democracy for another reason: the incompetence and ignorance of politicians, for that gave rise to factionalism, extreme violence, and partisan politics, which were the causes of political instability. For Plato, democracy did not tolerate highly gifted persons due to Hegelian tragedy. Plato's aversion to the democratic experiment, which reached its zenith during the time of Pericles, was partly intellectual and partly personal. It should be noted that Athenian democracy was limited, for it debarred aliens, slaves, and women from participating in the political process. In spite of the narrowness, it was a full list in the directness and equality with which all the citizens control legislation and administer public affairs. Athens was individualistic, excelling in literary pursuits, highly creative, democratic, and open. Sparta, on the other hand, was statist, regimented, oligarchic, and militaristic. Plato concluded that Sparta's military victory was due to its political and social system. He tried to infuse the communitarian spirit of Sparta into the individualistic Athenian society and temper democracy with aristocratic values. However, the model that he sketched in the Republic, far from integrating the two models, was highly holistic, elitist, regimented, and authoritarian. Now, Plato's moral philosophy and centrality of virtue. It addresses the question how we are to live a good life. He begins from an assumption which he shares with the rest of the society, namely that we all seek happiness. Virtues which enable us to deal well with the material advantages of our life are called in the laws as divine goods, in contrast to the human goods constituted by those material advantages. Without the divine goods, we will lose the benefit of the human ones. So, the value for us of wealth, health, and the like depends on our possession of virtues like courage and justice. The virtues depend in turn for their value in a human life on the practical reasoning which forms them and guides their application. In the Euthydemus, the virtues which make something out of the stuff of our lives are identified with wisdom, the practical intelligence which guides virtuous living. The philosophers use their knowledge of virtue to demand that the practices of the community need to be reformed radically. Attainment of supreme virtue is a lifelong process, which is both political and educational. Then about Plato's political philosophy and centrality of justice. Socrates examined the origin of states and cities and pointed out that they arose of two reasons. The first was mutual need, and the second, the differences in aptitudes of individuals. An ideal state for Plato possesses the four cardinal virtues of wisdom, courage, temperance or self-control and justice. The central question of the Republic was the meaning of justice or right conduct or morality. It did not refer to legality. On the use of justice to fit the individual into the community, Plato seems to argue that in human life, more substantial results are due to collective effort, and sustained collective effort is not possible without some norms of justice being in place. Since some women have reason dominating their souls just as some men do, these women can become philosopher queens after the requisite training in dialectics. Here he means justice does not have any gender bias. Now we are coming to the end of the lecture 1 of Plato. For more videos of Plato, stay connected with us. Then about the reading and references. The first one is The Open Society and Its Enemies, Volume 1 by C.R. Popper. Then History of Political Thought from Ancient Greece to Early Christianity by Janet Coleman. Then The History of Political Thought, Plato to Mars by Sushila Ramasamy. If you are new to my channel, please do like, share and subscribe. Stay connected with us, stay safe, study safe. Thank you.